Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Best Abilities. I know it's been a while since the last time. Having talked about 3 of the 4 DPS classes so far, I think we're gonna pass on Slayers and go into tanks next, just to keep things interesting, especially since we're supposedly about to enter a tank meta in Season 13. Now unlike fighters, mages, and marksmen whose goal is primarily to just deal damage, tanks have 2 fundamentally different purposes in a game. Aside from their universally high durability and below average damage output, what kind of tank you want to play really comes down to how much of the onus you want to place on your team. Tanks are evenly split between support and top and jungle respectively, some are more independent than others. So for this video, I'm going to do my best to be aware of both sides so I don't prioritize one or the other. Be that as it may, the same rules will apply just like the previous episodes. I'm going to be taking 3 abilities of each type, passive, Q, W, E, and ultimate, and evaluate them in a vacuum, how well they perform without consideration for their other abilities. This is where things are going to get tricky as the playstyle of a tank is usually determined by how their kit is formatted. For the class in general, you can't really replace one damaging ability with another since many of them require the rest of their stuff to function correctly. Regardless, I don't think it should get in the way too much, but it does render a few potential candidates ineligible to be chosen. Something like, Rammus's Frenzying Taunt, which would ordinarily be a fantastic lockdown tool, is really only good on him because the recoil damage from defensive ball curl and spike shell wouldn't be nearly as effective on a tank without those. By the way, for anyone who's interested in receiving coaching to help you through your climb this season, I'm actually hosting my own class on the 4th of February, which is this coming Saturday at 2 PM Eastern Time through Gosu Academy. Most of the time when players try to get better at the game, they look at very broad, blanket statement content like guides on the best champions or general tips, which are helpful mind you, but they lack that personalized attention to detail since everyone deals with their own unique situations. Gosu Academy is a specialized monthly training program where players have live sessions each week with challenger coaches and ex-pro players who can answer questions, offer advice, or go through VOD reviews together. It's a more one-to-one kind of tutoring mentorship program. They're also featuring a bootcamp with Verkayu alongside mine. I often get comments from players asking me for advice on how to climb, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to host a seminar of my own. And to kick things off, the first 100 people who use my code Vars can get the first month completely free. And just a reminder, my lesson will be on February 4th, this coming Saturday at 2 PM Eastern Standard Time. Looking forward to seeing you guys there. Anyways, this is episode 4, so by now you guys should know how this series plays out, so without further ado, let's begin with the passives. Like other classes, tanks have an extensive selection of useful passives, a few of which might be in contention for some of the best in the entire game. True to their role, most of them come in the form of increased resilience or supplemental damage to compensate for not having a lot of it in their base kit. But the ones I want to focus on were the 2 things tanks are well known for, durability and lockdown. My choices go as follows: Ornn, Nautilus, and Zac. You really can't put a price on the ability to purchase items remotely at any time and place. The only reason it's balanced on Ornn is due to him lacking any built-in sustain, so he will have to base eventually if he suffers too much damage or runs out of mana. Even so, purchasing as much as a cloth armor or a null magic mantle can make all the difference in surviving a skirmish or team fight. Not only that, but just by existing you gain 10% bonus armor, magic resist, and health from all sources, increased by 4% each time he upgrades a mythic item to a masterwork item. In other words, at level 17 he gains 30% bonus health, armor, and magic resist from all sources. That's pretty insane. Speaking of masterwork, each upgraded mythic has roughly 1,000 gold's worth of additional stats, allowing your team a permanent 5k gold advantage at 6 items versus 6 items. Granted, you can't apply his brittle debuff without Bellows Breath or Call of the Forge God. Once again, going back to how a tank's kit is built around working off of each other, but the rest of the passive is still pretty friggin' busted as it is. Nautilus' Staggering Blow doesn't have the same kind of complicated versatility as Ornn's Living Forge, but it does need to. On a separate timer for each target, your next basic attack does bonus physical damage and roots them in place for 0.75 to 1.5 seconds based on level. That's it. You get an unconditional point-and-click root just by attacking. It may not seem like a big deal, but on a tank, this is massive. It can be used to start a CC chain, essentially guaranteeing you'll be able to land whatever the hell you want on them after, or it can be used to extend a CC chain. After engaging with a dash type ability, you can follow up with an auto attack for more lockdown. Simple, but very effective. Lastly, we have Zac's Cell Division. The revive passive is kind of a meh in all honesty. It's good to have and can definitely buy you some time in teamfights if your teammates can protect you. But that's not the reason why I chose this, it's the regeneration. Each time you damage at least one enemy with an ability, a blob of goo drops on the ground, which you can then pick up to restore 4% of your maximum health. Technically 4 to 7, but that requires his ultimate. Now the point of Cell Division is to add a skill-expressive way for the player to reimburse the health they lost from casting Zac's basic abilities, which all use up his current health. But if we were to pair this up with damaging attacks that don't cost health, it's free regeneration on that scale. You can become virtually indestructible if you build your kit around this passive. although unfortunately there aren't that many damaging tank abilities that are as spammable as, say, Cassiopeia's Twin Fang. Anyways, honorable mentions go to Braum and Shen. You can think of Braum's concussive blows as a more powerful but delayed version of Nautilus's passive. Shen's Key Barrier is also an alternative to Zack's Cell Division, though I think the latter has more sustained potential. Then again, Shen's passive can't be nerfed with Grievous Wounds, only Serpent's Fang, so let's pick your poison. Qs are also divided into different types. For some tanks, it's their primary damaging ability like everyone else's, for others it's their primary engage or lockdown tool. I opted to go for a bit of both to account for the various benefits of either option, and with that, we're gonna go with Alistar, Amumu, and Scion. Pulverize in and of itself requires another ability to get the champion in range for the maximum effect, which in Alistar's case is Headbutt, but on its own, it's arguably one of the best crowd control abilities in the game. A fast AoE 1-second knockup to all targets around you on a modest cooldown. These days, it's hard to find crowd control of the same level of impact and convenience. Usually, long-lasting crowd control is single target like Morgana's Dark Binding, and AoE crowd control tends to be conditional, short-lasting, or exclusive to ultimates like Yasuo's Dash Knockup or Zack's Elastic Slingshot. For reference, Alistar's Q has the same effect radius as Malphite's ultimate and only half a second less knockup duration. Granted, it doesn't have the dash with it, but that's pretty dang good for a basic ability. The added benefit of Pulverize being a knockup is that it can also intercept dashes if timed correctly, whereas a stun cannot. The best engage tool for tanks would have to go to Amumu's Bandage Toss, especially since you can store 2 casts of it at a time. It's an 1100 range dash attached to a stun that does pretty serious damage if you ever decide to go AP. Even if you miss your first Q, you can just throw your second one right after. For all intents and purposes, it's a straight upgrade to Leona's Zenith Blade, though that's her E so it doesn't really matter. On that note, it would have been great if Bandage Toss was on Amumu's E so that way you can take it alongside Pulverize, but what can you do? Now we need damage, and I would have to run Scion's Decimating Smash. While it is a channel ability, thus making it vulnerable to disruption, the damage, range, and pressure this ability has cannot be understated. With how far it reaches, it's surprisingly effective as a neutral tool. 850 at max distance allows Scion to harass even ranged champions, which is saying a lot. And of course, if you decide to take crowd control on your W and E, you can basically guarantee a fully charged Q every time. For honorable mentions, I'm gonna go with Leona's Shielded Daybreak for being a low cooldown point and click stun, never a bad choice, and Shen's Twilight Assault for giving him unreasonably high damage output and dueling potential for a tank, though it kind of does depend on some way for him to get behind his opponent such as Shadow Dash. Now we move on to Ws, which are also more or less divided into 2 categories. It's either a defensive tool such as a shield, or the champion's main form of persistent damage, or it can be both. The ones I'm gonna pick are Maokai, Scion, and Nunu. As far as engage goes, Twisted Advance has a lot going for it. Out of all the point and click dashes, this one has the shortest range, capping out at only 525. But it makes up for that by being untargetable during the dash, effectively making it an unstoppable dash since you don't re-emerge until after the dash concludes, so it doesn't collide with things like Talia's Unraveled Earth or Poppy's Steadfast Presence. And the root duration isn't half bad either, 1.4 seconds at max rank. Next up is Scion's Soul Furnace. There was no way this wasn't going to be in the top 3 Ws for tanks. This is literally the only reason why inting Scion, at least prior to the tower damage nerfs, was actually viable. Not only is it a very strong shield that can explode to deal damage, but the passive grants you bonus health every time you last hit minions, monsters, or score takedowns on champions. With good CS numbers, you can reasonably expect to have around 600 bonus HP at 20 minutes and over 1000 at 30. Now just imagine if you had this, plus Ornn's Living Forge. Up to 30% bonus health on top of that, you'd have like 10,000 HP at 30 minutes or something ridiculous. And then we wrap it up with Nunu's biggest snowball ever. This ability is one of the best engage tools in the game, period. You travel such a far distance with a big ass snowball that can knock enemies up while doing pretty dang good damage, and since it's a hitbox in front of Nunu, even if you stun or root him, the snowball keeps going and smacks you right in the face. Moreover, that makes it a disjointed engage, so other dash knockups like Vi or Sejuani cannot contest it. A cute and adorable animation that belies an extremely powerful and versatile attack. Honorable mentions go to Galio's Shield of Durand for offering a sizable magic damage shield and damage reduction on top of a pretty solid AoE taunt, although I still think Snowball is better, and Ornn's Bell's Breath for his displacement immunity and tons of percent health damage. By the way, the Brittle debuff can still be triggered with crowd control to get that 30% reduced tenacity. You won't get the bonus damage or set it off with basic attacks unless you have Living Forge, but the debuff itself can still be capitalized on. E's for tanks are usually their mobility tool. If not that, then some form of crowd control or setup for the rest of their combo. You know, standard fare. The 3 I went with are Zack, Shen, and Gragas. I know I said earlier that Nunu's biggest snowball ever is one of the best engage tools, and I stand by that, but another fantastic one is Elastic Slingshot. Up to 1800 units at max rank and a 1 second AoE knockup. Unless I'm mistaken, Zack C is the longest non-ultimate dash of all time. The only one I can think of that comes close would be Camille's hookshot, and that's only 1600, whereas this one is 1800. It does drain 4% of your current health with each cast though, so if you don't have sustain in your kit then it might be a problem, but any tank would be perfectly happy to have this. Next up is Shen's Shadow Dash. Try saying that sentence 3 times fast. Most dashes that come in crowd control can only affect one target like Maokai's Twisted Advance, but this one can taunt as many champions as he collides with, and the damage scales off your bonus health, which can add up over time. Nothing really too special about it, just a very solid ability. The other one I chose is Gragas' Body Slam, which is more or less the same function except instead of a taunt, it's disruption. He does stop at the first enemy hit, but there is a collision radius, so if you time and position it correctly, you can hit multiple targets. Again, it's pick your poison. Honorable mentions go to Nunu's Snowball Barrage for its usefulness as a follow-up engage, and Braum's Unbreakable for its situationally effective protection against projectiles. So now we arrive at Ultimates. Ultimates are a tank's most explosive engage tool. A lot of their power budget is allocated toward their ultimate for good reason. Well-timed use of it can single-handedly turn team fights around, probably more so than any other class. It was kinda difficult to narrow it down to just 3, but I tried to consider which ones would be the best all-purpose, all-around abilities that would work well in any situation, and I ended up with Malphite, Amumu, and Nautilus. Unstoppable Force. It needs no introduction, it's a super ultimate. A fast, long-range, CC immune AoE 1.5 second knockup. If you were to ask any League player what's the first thing that pops up in their head when they hear the word engage, it's probably this one. The only reason why Malphite is picked by so many autofill top laners and why Sylas players have wet dreams about seeing Malphite on the enemy team. I can imagine trying some hilariously broken combos like Malphite Ultimate, Scion Q, Galio W, then Nunu E for like 8 seconds of lockdown for the entire enemy team. Speaking of lockdown, Amumu's Curse of the Sad Mummy trades away the dash for increased range. At a target radius of 550, I wish you luck in trying to get far enough away from an ability with only a quarter-second cast time. It lost a good amount of power after getting nerfed from 1.5 to 2 seconds down to just 1.5 at all levels, but really it gets the job done anyway, so long as you have a way to get within the center of the enemy team, and there's a lot of ways to do that, like Zack's Elastic Slingshot, or you can take Amumu's Q with this ultimate and replace the W and E. Lastly, we have Nautilus's Depth Charge. I chose this because it's a more guaranteed engage tool that, while initially aimed for only one person, does have the potential to knock up multiple targets, and at level 16, it's 2 seconds of lockdown for anyone that gets caught. Furthermore, it's an engage ultimate that isn't committal. You can hit someone from up to 825 units away, and it grants vision of the area, so if you use it thinking you found an enemy team member to pick off only for the rest of their squad to be there, you don't have to follow up on it. I'd argue it's not as effective in full-blown teamfights as the previous two, but it's more flexible, and for many players that matters a lot. Honorable mentions go to Shen, Alistar, and I'm gonna add a third one cause why not, Ornn. Stand United is one of those abilities that I feel like would be absolutely disgusting if it was on someone who could split push and 1v1 very effectively. I know there are many split pushers like Yorick, Nasus and stuff who kinda need their ultimates to be a side lane threat, but in all seriousness, this would make macro brain dead as all hell. Since it scales off your bonus health, imagine what would happen if you took Soul Furnace. You would give anyone on your team like a 2000 HP shield no problem. Only reason I didn't put this in top 3 is cause Engage is more preferable for a tank. Same goes for Alistar's Unbreakable Will. It's a CC cleanse and 7 seconds of being virtually indestructible, but on its own it doesn't really change the game state all too much. If you're up against an enemy team with very high damage, then this would be very effective, but I'd say only if you're the sole frontline for your team and you just have to stand there and face tank. Ornn's Call of the Forge God has a lot more range than that of Amumu's, Malphite's, or Nautilus, but what makes it a bit worse is that there are a lot of ways you can mess up with this ability. In theory, if you manage to tag all 5 members of the enemy team with both the charge back and charge forward, it accomplishes more. But doing so is kinda difficult unless there's a secondary source of lockdown on your team, and we're going under the assumption that there isn't. Alrighty, so that wraps up the list. I know there were a lot of repeat abilities, but like I said, many tanks have stuff that's only good in the context of their kit. I could have thrown in Malphite's Thunderclap, but to get the full bonus armor you need Granite Shield, or once again the Rammus example with this taunt. I was thinking about adding Tariq's Bastion for the list of Ws, but you would have to build an entire kit around just that ability, and there aren't that many good things you can take. Sure, if you feel creative, you can try maybe Tariq W for 2 Amumu ultimates or 2 Alistar Qs, but I don't see a whole lot of ways you can take full advantage of it since we're only looking at tank abilities, not other stuff. Hope you guys enjoyed the video though. If you have, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe, really helps out my channel. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other best abilities videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Take care.